My name is Jesse Michael. This is Patrick Conant. We are previous co-captains, the both of us, of Code for Asheville. We also run a web development firm and mobile applications firm here in Asheville, which is called PRC Applications. Our company dedicates 20%, oftentimes more, at least 20% time to the community. Oh, thank you.
And also, this year we are community fellows with Code for America. They're doing their first test run of, they've had a fellowship for a few years and they've turned it into a community fellowship where they're providing support to people to do civic technology work in their own communities. And Jesse and I are really excited to be part of their inaugural class. So our presentation today is called Public Data Analysis for Non-Analysts. In other words, how to think and talk like a public data nerd. So we're going to give a lot of non-technical ideas and techniques to think about data that our government uses, think of ways that we can gain access to that information and share it with others, and once we have that, how we can use it to build a better community.
Why are we here? Yes.
So to start, this is an introductory level session. We're going to be talking about high-level concepts of public data.
And this is a workshop for everyone. You do not need tech skills. So we're trying to make it as accessible as possible.
And I would point out, this is a workshop we hope to do many times over the next year. This is our first run at it. We have practice, but
feedback is important.
Yeah, we're definitely interested in everyone's feedback. That's why we pass these surveys out at the end of the session. And we just want to hear, whether this is giving you the information you're looking for, or if there's any ways we can improve it as we go along. What we're going to do today is we're going to learn a bit about what public data is, why it's important, and how it can be used as a powerful tool.
By the end of the workshop, we just want you to feel comfortable, confident, knowing the available tools and resources that are available to you in finding, navigating public data and making public data requests. And finding answers to your questions, importantly. Let's talk about data a little bit. So at the kind of the boring definition level, data is facts, figures, statistics, and other information that can be used in analysis or as a reference. And as you can see, I've included a picture of the credible Hulk because he says, because I always back up my rage with facts and documented sources. So it's good to be impassioned, it's good to be empowered as a community, it's good to be critical or enthusiastic, but it's always important to have a facts-based discussion whenever you are trying to advocate for policy change.
And I think we want to identify the difference between data, which could be anywhere. It could be private data. It could be a spreadsheet of what I ate this week. You could call that data. And open data, which is what we're really trying to talk about today. So open data is facts, figures, statistics that are publicly accessible and widely available. It's open, like the door is open, you can see into it.
Open data can also be used kind of to describe a concept that some organizations have that basically dictates their practices to try to ensure that any kind of data or information they produce is accessible and available to the public. So it is it's a concept, it's a practice as well as a noun, essentially.
And also importantly is, why does open data matter? Why is it important? And personally, I feel that open data is very important because it can help the public understand what challenges exist in the community on a system-wide level. It can also help us see where an organization is performing well, and it can set metrics, a starting point from which we can try to improve.
And the important thing to remember is, we pay for this data with our taxes. Everything that the city generates should belong to us, so within reason. So it's just important to remember, we pay for these services. The data does belong to the community. So.
And open data in particular is really important because up to this point, we rely on government or governmental organizations to tell us, to give us a report on how they're doing. Open data really changes the game in a really important way. It allows citizens, community members, anyone to look at the same information the government uses to do their work and take a look and say, is this working well? And is it working well for everyone? Are some people being left out? Are certain aspects of the system not doing what we hope they should be doing? So really, open data is so important because it is the tool by which citizens can hold government accountable.
And it is important to note, not all public data is out there for consumption. Some of it you do have to request from the city. We play a hugely important role in this process, and we will cover this later on in more detail in this session.
So what type of data is public? We're just going to give a little background on our experience and Code for Asheville's experience helping our city become more transparent, specifically around open data. So Code for Asheville's really one of our first big wins was working with city council and city staff to pass an open data policy, which happened in October 2015. The open data policy basically says there's all kinds of things that are public records under North Carolina law, but an open data policy says the city is going to proactively put more of that information out for the public to access. And when they put the information out there, it'll be in a machine-readable format. So we're not going to get PDFs of tables of numbers. We're going to get a data feed that technical types or statisticians or people can actually use to do interesting analysis.
This is easier with some sets of data than others, but part of this initiative is to create platforms where the community can go in and access this data to make it basically open by default. So the city does have several resources like Simplicity and the city's open data portal, which the IT team at the city has done a really fantastic job trying to build the tools that are necessary to release this data proactively.
And I just wanted to point out that there's a difference between data, open data, and public records. There's a lot of things that you can receive access to that are public records. You might have to ask for it. You might have to do a records request. Open data is really powerful because the city is putting it out there. It's updated automatically. And but that doesn't mean that open data is the only resource we can look at to answer our questions.
And at the city, most of the time the data is in a database. There are, there's data that pertains to all different kinds of subjects, public safety, planning and zoning, property information. Sometimes the city, or sometimes the data exists in a feed, sometimes a database. It sometimes has a visualization that makes it a little bit easier to consume, but oftentimes not. Sometimes that's our job to create the accompanying visualization for the data.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about why data, just reinforcing this point of why we're here, why we're talking about data. Yes?
How do you feel about questions during your talk?
That's fine, yeah.
Before we leave the subject of open data versus
Sure.
public records,
Mm-hmm.
what's the explanation for why all public records cannot be open data?
It depends. So in some cases, yes. The question is, why are all public records not open data? And there's a number of reasons for that. Sometimes it's technical. Sometimes it say something like, emails or specific reports are not things that can easily be turned into a data feed. Because typically you have to go from a database to an open data feed. So if it's something that someone compiles manually, they do it on a spreadsheet and create this PDF, that can be harder. So there's some technical reasons. Really what I think the biggest reason why more stuff is not on open data now is just a question of resources. The city IT department plays a really big role in actually making things open data, but they only have so many people. So, and I'll let Eric respond.
Yeah, it's a good question because I think there's three reasons might not be out there. And Patrick named one, which is, it isn't really data. It's not convenient. It's not a data feed. Because if we're going to put something out, it needs to be automated because we're completely overwhelmed with work. We can't be actually hand moving things. A second is just the resources working, a decision to release a data feed is actually a fairly expensive process of setting up the jobs and talking with the department, talking with the public, making sure we're not impacting something negatively. And then the third is sometimes we might choose not to use a public piece of data in the open data feed. And an example, agree or disagree, one of the examples is the address of sexual assault victims. It is a public record. If it's reported, that address is public record. You can go and you can request the crime report with all the information and so on. But the consequences of putting that up on a feed that can be machine read allows uses that might have a much higher impact than forcing people to go and make the request. So that's kind of three categories of why something might not automatically go to an open data.
And, sorry, go ahead. Okay, I just want to add to this. A big part of data advocacy is coming together and sitting down at the table with the city, which we're fortunate enough to have an IT team who's willing to, more deeply consider the confidentiality, some of the sensitive data we have, and figure out, ways that we can release it in a responsible way. There's a lot of considerations, but typically the city is willing to, work on a solution with the community if it's something that's important.
And I should just throw out one, since we started our open data program in 2012, Jonathan Feldman, who's the CIO, wrote an article kind of saying, given that we can't do everything, how are we going to prioritize what we do? And there's really three things. One is, if we're getting public records requests all the time, let's just automate that. And so that actually becomes a way of reducing workload within the city. That's one. Public interest is one of the factors in prioritizing something. So if there's something you want to see that's not there, advocate for it, because that tells us there's interest. And then the third is, of course, similar. It's city council from a policy perspective is asking us to prioritize. Then we would do that. But the biggest factor outside of kind of efficiency is somebody in the public is making a case for its value, and then we're going to prioritize that.
Is there a portion of your budget specifically earmarked for migration of data into? Okay.
We wish.
It's a good point, though. That is something that community members could advocate for, which could make more open data available.
One more quick. Does the county have anything comparable?
The county does publish some data sets. They do not have an open data policy,
Right.
And I wish they did.
That's something I'm going to propose the Code for Asheville start working on.
Nice.
Is getting a similar policy passed in the county, given reasons over the last year or so that we might want them to be a little more transparent.
Mm-hmm. And also the county has different types of data than the city, so there could be some really interesting things we could find there. So looping back, we're talking about why data matters. And as we talked about a little bit when we did laying it on the line, in many discussions, many public policy discussions are talking about how our city does or does not work well for everyone. We start with an anecdotal account of a problem or a system that's not working well. And in some cases, ones that are working really well. But you tend to hear things like, I went to the DMV, I just had to update my address, and I was there for 2 hours, and it was horrible.
And so here we have the build, measure, learn loop. This is it's a software principle, but it can be used for a lot of different things. It basically You create something, you create good practices for measuring it using data. You analyze that data to determine what the outcomes were of the actions you took, and then you adjust. You figure out if there's any corrective action that needs to be taken, and you repeat the loop over and over until you have a perfect utopian system.
And I would add on to that, Jesse mentioned outcomes, and I think data is really important from a government perspective, because a lot of the data we see actually shows the outcomes of the system. So it doesn't matter how many staff members were assigned to do this or what policies existed that may or may not have been followed. Data allows us to see really the answer to the question a lot of people care about: is government making our citizens' lives better?
So it creates a focus on the outcomes, which is very important.
And I do want to be clear. When I'm saying citizens, I'm not just saying, I don't mean to say just American citizens. Government works for people regardless of their legal status.
So, we're going to take a few minutes, and we are going to talk about a few of the resources that are available to us. And we're going to get a little interactive and see if there might be any questions from the group that you guys might have that we might be able to answer in a little bit in this session using public data. So
we're going to get into some techniques and tools over the next part of our session, but we thought at this point it would be good to see, just get everyone thinking a bit about types of data our city may have or may not have, and questions you might have that may or may not be related to your own experience that data might help us answer.
Yes.
I'll put an example out there to get us started. I know tourism is something that's discussed a lot in our city and the impact it has on our infrastructure. So I might have a question about the relationship between tourism and crime. So I could say, how many tourists were arrested in Asheville last year? Does anyone have a question or an idea they'd like to throw out there? I know that I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. I have a lot of them if no one else has them. So, yes.
I have one that I was told of that they didn't come today, but it was a concern about similar to traffic stop, but the Latinx community, where the police are putting stops to check for licenses, does it seem to be targeted towards the Latinx community?
Mm-hmm. So, and I think let's think about that one a little bit more, because I think the first step when you have a question like this is you have to start to figure out how to unpack it. So for this specific question, how are checkpoints conducted by the police that may be impacting the Latinx community? One of the first questions we have there is who's running the checkpoints? Is it Asheville police officers? Because the city would have that data, but if it's sheriff's office, you might have to talk to the county about that data. So that's one of the first things we'd want to start to figure out. That the person you're referring to may know or may not. We might actually have to go and ask and figure out who does license checkpoints. Another question would be, what does that data look like, right? They might not have a database of checkpoints. So we might have to start to think about what kind of data does exist that might indicate that a checkpoint was being operated. So that could be looking for something like a lot of seatbelt tickets or driving without a license tickets that occur at a single location on a single day. So I'm just trying to explain some of the ways that if I was asked that question, what I would start to think of and how we could try to get an answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, we have. All right, we'll do the Latin. I think these are some good ones.
We can use these as examples. I would like to just maybe we can talk through a few other ones just to give everyone some ideas.
Sure.
Yes.
What are the most dangerous intersections?
Ah.
For pedestrians, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's an interesting one, right? Because what we're talking about is when an accident occurs, I assume the police come, and so they make a report of that. And I believe the state also tracks data related to pedestrian and bicycle injuries. But again, the first question we have there is who has the data. So I would probably start by talking to the city, talking to the police department, and going from there up the line and seeing who's keeping track of that. Are there any? Yes.
This is my personal, but where is there free Wi-Fi in the city?
Okay. And that could be a type of data that the city doesn't currently collect, but maybe they should. Or maybe it's a data set that the community could work to collect. There isn't really a strict line between what the city, can choose to make a repository of and what they don't, but it helps if people ask for it.
Right. Sometimes you're creating data with a request. Yes.
I just want to ask Jim a question about his question. Are you saying where are all the city-owned spots like that give free Wi-Fi via the city?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Okay.
It probably, since it's for the city, it'd be, I would think they'd have a list of where they have all their open networks.
Mm-hmm.
It must be on an asset map somewhere.
Right.
Right.
That they track that and make sure that they're working.
Bless you. Got some good questions.
What are some other areas? I would point out one of the things the city does is they do building permits. So you could say, how many building permits were pulled in my neighborhood last year, which might tell you, I don't know, how your neighborhood might be changing over time. What are some other? Yes, Sarah.
I don't know what the question would be, but is there a way to find out with all this affordable housing questions going on when they bring their plan to city council and they say, I'm going to have 10 affordable housing units. When it's built, were there 10?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. Yep.
So I think we could state that as how does the city verify the incentives they provide for affordable housing? And I think that's a very good question, and I don't know the answer.
I also haven't formulated the question that goes with it, but like the city has a forestry department. I had a tree that was dying, and an arborist quoted me like $1,500 to take it down, but the city did it for free because it was on the easement along the road.
Mm-hmm.
Ground came back. I mean, it took a couple of years, but they came back, ground the stump, and those seem like services that disproportionately benefit homeowners in neighborhoods with large lots that are wooded. And I don't know what the question is, but maybe looking at how resources are allocated.
Right. I would think if we wanted to start with that one as a data question, it would just be how often does the city, I guess it's the city forestry department, do tree removal for residents, and where in the city does that occur?
But I think there's a broader question that is how, what's the distribution by neighborhood of city spending? And that's not going to be a clean, easy question to answer. For the most part, the city won't have the data, but there might be some interesting proxies.
Yeah.
Police presence, tree service, parks, all kinds of stuff. What?
Potholes.
Potholes.
How well the streets are.
Right.
So that it's an example of a question where there's a really broad question and you might have to come at it from multiple kind of non-obvious directions to start to build a picture of how are the city's resources being spent in different neighborhoods.
And I would say it's equally important that if you ask that question about data and get it in front of the city, and maybe that data isn't collected at all, say for the affordable housing incentives, then we can start a conversation of you really should be collecting that and sharing it with the public. So I guess what my point is if you have a data question, even if it's not collected, it's equally important to ask it.
Mm-hmm. What would I read? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I actually found the city's strategic plan, which was done by some outside group. kind of the usual stuff that you'd expect to see, some consulting group to come up with. But I'd be really curious, there's sort of a truth in budget. A budget says what you're willing to spend money on. So like a high-level view of how the city brings in money and how it's allocating it relative to its goals. Is the goal of Asheville to build out tourism as big as it can be? Just how this distribution of
Right.
funds are, and what the 5-year review of that.
Okay. Yeah. And I think the budget has all kinds of data questions that we could look into.
Yeah,
So.
but it reflects people's priorities.
Right.
That's a great point.
And I would find it interesting there is how are people's priorities measured then as well, right? How would you compare the two? And I'm not sure whether the city does do a lot of feedback surveys directly around the budget, but it's a very interesting idea, I think. Okay, well, I think we have a good list of ideas here, and we wanted to write them up both so we can reference them afterwards, but also as we go through the session, when we talk about ways to try to answer these questions, we'll try to see if there's any of these that are a good fit, and maybe we can make a public records request today. We'll see how it goes. We actually don't have to do this. We wrote the questions down up here. So here we're talking about how to evaluate the questions. I think we did some of this interactively. But let's follow up here a little bit and just ask, has anyone here in the group today had a question and actually tried to work through the city process to get it answered? And what I'm interested in specifically is whether you asked someone who worked at the city, if you found it on the open data portal, if you made a public records request. I'm just looking for some,
By a show of hands,
some shared
anyone,
experience.
ever asked the city a question, pretty much in any capacity. Okay, all right, okay, yeah, all right.
Has anyone, let's do a show of hands, has anyone looked at the city's open data portal?
Okay, all right, excellent.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Has anyone here filed a public records request? I know one person has, and I have as well.
Lauren, you should be raising both hands, I feel like. Yeah.
Has anyone ever...
Well, can I ask you a question? So I live in Hendersonville. I feel like I may not have a right to do a public records request in the city of Asheville.
You do.
You do.
I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is city policy that we serve the people who are in Asheville, even if that's on their way through.
Okay.
We are not just resident focused or just taxpayer focused.
And this North Carolina state law does, I'm not, I'd have to check. I don't even think you have to be a resident of North Carolina.
No, you don't. I mean, you have the right to ask.
Yeah.
But from a city policy perspective, if you're part of the actual community, which you clearly are, then you're the same as anybody else.
Yeah. Okay.
I would.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, has anyone ever asked either an elected official or a member of city staff a question that relates to data? Just show of hands. Few people have. Okay. That's interesting. Just that a lot of people have looked at the data portal, and not that many people have done public records requests, which I entirely understand, and I think today we're going to try to make it seem a little less intimidating to do that. But to start, we're going to start with what is the easiest way to look at data. So, Jesse, you want to
I'll
drive
drive,
the laptop?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
what we're going to do today, and I know several of you have seen this before, is we're just going to do just a quick overview of the city's open data portal. So the city's open data portal lives at data.asheville.nc.gov. If you can either search by name or you can scroll down and there's a bunch of categories that shows a lot of the data sets the city has. So if you're wondering does this data exist, this could be the first place to look. And if you find the data that can answer your question on there, you're in luck because you have the information you need and it's right here.
So let's click into planning and zoning, and we'll check out food locations just as an example of a data set.
So once you look at a data set, I just want to highlight, this data portal doesn't do everything for you, but it does do a few things that are really cool. So if the data has a location, we can see it on a map.
And if we scroll down,
You can see the fields in there, and you can also see a table. So this is a data set. I don't entirely know the full history of it, but it's showing food locations in Asheville. So this is data that could be helpful if you're trying to identify food deserts. It shows where tailgate markets are. It shows where, I think where the Manna, some of their food distribution points are. So this could be something you could build an app out of this to help people find food near them. You could also use it to analyze food deserts.
So let's look at traffic stops after October 1st, 2017.
Right, so this is a data set. Code for Asheville requested this in our petition for police accountability through data transparency, and also through our work with the NAACP to look at traffic stop data over the past 2 years. The city added this to their open data portal, and what's really interesting about this data set is the state law does require all police departments of any size, except the very smallest, to report a bunch of data to the state. The location of the stop is not one of the fields mandated by the state, but our city's police department started to collect this information. And for the first time, we can actually see on a map where all of these traffic stops are occurring. So this is a really interesting data set. And Jesse's going to show that if you seeing them on a map, that's a lot of information, but you can also filter it. So maybe we want to look just at Tunnel Road, and I think you have to take the dot off. And then all of a sudden, okay, now we're looking at a more manageable set of information. And you can see from the map that looks like Tunnel Road, both South Tunnel and the other Tunnel Road. And now we can look down and start to look at the data a little more. So this requires a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of digging, but you can see, whether a warning was issued, a ticket was written, things like that. You can see if the vehicle was searched. You can see if the driver was searched. You can see if why they did a search. Was it probable cause? Was it consent? What caused them to ask for consent? You have to have reasonable suspicion to request a consent search. So we're just showing you broadly that you can use this tool, you can map it, you can filter it, and you can also download the data. So maybe you want to actually, use Excel, use a spreadsheet, use Google Docs, and do some work after this. The data portal can either let you download everything in there or your little filtered view. So this is one technique you could use to get half the way there, then get some information and do some more analysis.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And then the last piece is if you're a developer, there is also a REST API off of this data portal, and the city has some other APIs available that you should talk to Eric about if you want to integrate with the city's data that way. And I would add that if you have any questions about the data portal, Eric Jackson works for the city. Scott Barnwell is also here as well from the city IT department, and they're great resources either if you have questions or if there's something you'd like to see on there. It is very helpful for the community to say what we'd like prioritized in terms of open data.
Oh, sorry. Let me.
Okay, so that's one technique. So what if you go on there and we had a lot of questions here. A lot of them were not already on the open data portal. So if it's not already on there, what do you do?
I messed up here. Okay.
And I'll tell you what you do.
Sorry. There you go.
What you probably want to do is you want to start to think of who could help me answer this question. So we've got a picture of the city organizational chart over here. But really what we're saying is either use the city website, use Google, and just make a guess of who might be able to guide you in the right direction. So You're talking about police data, the police department. But if you're talking about something like housing, where does that fall in the city? I think that would probably be community and economic development. So it's one of the tools, one of the pieces of knowledge that you can build through experience, asking data questions to figure out who has the right answers.
And you know, it's the city is it's a machine, but it's also a collection of people. And a lot of people are they're really happy to fulfill these requests, and you can build some really good relationships with people in the city, and a lot of times they're as curious about the data as you are in many cases. So don't be afraid to reach out.
And I would say we're going to talk about public records requests in a minute. But I would recommend this as a first step. It's more personal. You can talk to someone and just say, hey, I'm trying to learn more about this. And then you might actually learn more about what data the city does or doesn't collect, who you maybe should be talking to with your questions. And that might be an easier way to go than just doing a public records request right off the bat, because you might learn how to structure your request better. So,
this next part will be we'll be taking a bit of a deeper dive into making a successful public records request. We've made a lot of them to varying degrees of success, but there are some key things you can do to ensure that your request gets fulfilled as completely and efficiently as possible.
And Jesse, why is Aaliyah on the screen?
Aaliyah is shown here because the number one rule in making a public records request is persistence. And Aaliyah says, if at first you don't succeed, brush yourself off and try again. So,
I'm not going to read this to anyone, but I want everyone to know that their public records in North Carolina are governed by the NC Public Records Law. It's Chapter 132. And it's a pretty long law, but it's actually a very powerful law. Some states do not have as permissive of a public records law. And we're going to boil this down into something a little more understandable. So what this means to non-lawyers, to people I'm like, it's all good, man, is that the law applies to records made or received in connection with the transaction of public business. So public officials or community members like myself who are on some city committees, if we're doing work that relates to the government's business, I'm creating public records.
The law does apply to all types of state and local government agencies and all types of records. So that can be paper, electronic records, recording, films, videos, photographs, Facebook messages, text messages, as long as it pertains to public business.
And I would say our law is powerful, as I mentioned, because almost everything is a public record unless it falls into a few exceptions. Those generally fall into two categories. There are some others, but the most important ones are personnel records, so things that are related to employees' confidential information, some things related to their job performance, some cases of personally identifying information, and also anything related to ongoing criminal investigations. So there's clear exemptions in the law for both of those circumstances. Beyond that, it's worth making the request.
Another important thing to keep in mind, anyone can request access. So you don't have to be a citizen or a constituent of the agency you're requesting information from. It should be a completely level playing field.
And also, the state law does allow public agencies to charge reasonable fees for documents. So this is something that comes up in the news sometimes, where one agency or another will start to put really high prices on records requests that they don't want to fulfill. But generally, over time, we find that we very rarely have been asked to pay fees for public records requests. And typically, if you just keep asking the right way, you can receive access to that information.
Can I ask a question about that? Do you know of any funds, like nonprofit funds or something, if someone were to say it's going to cost $20 to get this and they didn't have the $20, that it could be covered by some kind of generous foundation or something, or?
I'm not personally aware of a fund like that. I think that would be interesting, but I don't know off the top of my head someone that does that. Similarly, the other situation with public records is if you have every right to a record and they refuse it, there's a need that I don't know of anyone that's filling it for some kind of legal fund to deal with those cases.
So before we kind of dive into the specifics here, I just want to, as a high level point, just say in public data requests, kindness and detail are key. So be nice and be detailed. And now we are going to show you some examples. This is an example of a poorly structured public data request. I want to see all city staff emails. Give them to me now, you dummies, or else.
And in comparison, a good request would say something like, hello, I'd like to make a public records request. Calling it out as a public records request is good for clarity. To the city of Asheville for records around the utilization of city parking decks from 01/01/2016 to 12/31/2016. I would ideally like to receive those documents in a machine-readable format as CSV. So it's important when you're asking for records to not say, just give me everything if you don't need everything, because it's going to take a while. It's going to cause a lot of confusion and questions that, if you ask for certain information, it wasn't always digitized. So putting a date range that's relatively recent can help you see what does exist, and then maybe you go back further. It's also really important where I'm saying receive these documents in a machine-readable format such as CSV. If you don't want to get a PDF back with a table on it, then ask for a CSV and be specific. That's a comma-separated value file.
Yes.
Yeah, so like a spreadsheet. So you could say Excel, CSV, anything like that would probably have about the same result. And also, you have to be specific about what you're asking. Utilization of city parking decks, not, I don't know.
They'd probably come back
I want
to you with-
information
yeah.
on our parking decks. You have to be specific about what you're looking for.
And just to add, we just have a note here. Be kind, be courteous, be respectful. It does always seem like you're writing into a machine, but they're real people and they have feelings. So, and they're just much more willing to help you if you're nice to them. So.
And I would say, you have every right to that information, but if you explain what you're looking for, you explain why you're doing it, that can help things move along quicker.
You get more flies with honey than vinegar.
So that's how you could do it yourself. You can just email whoever has the records or the data you need. However, if you don't want to go through all of that trouble, we've actually built a tool that makes it a little easier to make public records requests. So Jesse and I, about 2 years ago, built this site called Sunshine Request, which is designed to make the process of doing public records requests a little easier. So instead of writing an email and figuring out who it goes to, you can go to sunshinerequest.com, and there's a simple form on the left. You put in a subject, a message, which government entity you're trying to send it to, and a start and end date, which aren't required, but as I showed in the example, it's really helpful to include that information. So you go on here, you fill out the form, hit send, and then that's it. There's some advantages to doing it this way. Sunshine Request we built because it allows anyone to make a records request anonymously. So you don't have to put your name on it, which can be intimidating to some people. You don't want to waste people's time, or if you're asking for something that might be controversial, you just prefer to do it anonymously.
And I just want to show that we log all of the requests. Sorry, what's that? Okay, is there a better one? Sorry. Okay. Oh.
So on the right side of the page, you see some of our recent ones. And the View All Requests page shows every request we've gotten from the site. The reason we built Sunshine Requests is because we don't want lots of people asking for the same information over and over. It wastes government's time, it wastes our time. And really, we just thought it was better if we're all asking for public information for everyone to have access to it. So we built Sunshine Requests to do that. So what you would do is you'd fill out the form, and then just check back on the site. And as your request moves through the process, you can keep track of the updates. We also have a Facebook page and an email address, support@sunshinerequest.com, where you can contact us to follow up. You might identify which request is yours if you do that. But if you just have questions about how to structure a request or just want to check on the status, you're welcome to contact us that way.
And we just want to formally introduce Lauren, who is our lead operator of Sunshine Request. She does a fantastic job, and we love her.
She is what makes Sunshine Request work.
Yeah, exactly.
That is the automation.
Yeah, exactly.
And I will point out that we eventually want to make the site more high-end and automated. Right now, it looks very high-tech, but it really is just us fulfilling all of these requests. But we like to do it.
Yeah.
Now, this is just one way that the city they get requests directly. Do they log, can you make a request to see what all the requests?
Yes,
Yes,
and we
and
have.
that is happening.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
And hopefully, so we have a platform that has the capability to show all requests that have been made, and I believe it is on track to have that feature turned on, so that you can also just go directly to the city and see previous records requests and just download it again. But that hasn't been operationalized yet. Hopefully it will soon.
Right. So, and that is one thing. If you send a request into the city, your name is logged. Other people can see that. Some people, I personally don't mind people knowing everything I've asked for, but some people might not want that.
So do we want to put in a Sunshine Request?
I think just with where we are with time,
Okay.
we'll just keep going.
Okay, next
but,
time.
I do want everyone to know if you have an idea or one of the questions we have here, just go on the site, drop it in, and we'll get to work on it next week.
Yeah, and we'll work with you if your request needs to be more specific. We'll help you navigate the process. So yeah, definitely use it if you have any questions, and we will help you.
Will you switch the screen back?
Yes.
I love the smiley faces and the.
That was Holden.
Yeah, and I want to add, Holden, who was here earlier, designed the site. And what we tried to do was say, public records requests are a really intimidating process. Let's make a site that feels the opposite, that makes it actually seem like fun to do one of these requests.
Can I just
Yes.
add to that with the smiley faces? So there's different, like he said, there's a list of things we know we should be doing as soon as we can to make the site way more user friendly, so you can easily track when your request gets updated, even though they're anonymous and stuff. But in the short term, all those little smileys, there's, I believe, 4 or 5, maybe 6 different status icons. So when you submit a request and it hasn't been published to our site, which might mean I'm reviewing it, or there could be just some questions we had before we're able to publish it, it's got an icon that'll say in review. Once it'll say pending, then it will become in review. Then once it gets marked sent to government. If there's any back and forth between myself or whoever and the government, it might say follow up, it might say clarification requested, clarification provided. We also have one that says refused or something like that, where like if they just say no, we're not going to fulfill this, it gives them kind of like a frowny, wiggly face. And then there's completed. So if you ever do need to track a request and it's not something that I've posted about on Facebook, you can just do like Command F and search for your request title or something like that on the site.
There's a search tool coming. It's not
Yeah, search is coming.
So let's move on to, so you have the data, you've made the request, or you found it on on one of the many tools that the city has. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can use data to impact policy change and why it's important for that.
So this is the way we've typically done this, and we're just sharing this because I think it's a process that might work. It's not something that I've seen defined by anyone, but this is the process we've followed in Asheville, and it's worked. It's produced some really important results. So in a lot of cases, what we do is we use personal experiences as a hypothesis. So we start with an individual story, which could be I had an experience that was very good or very bad, or I know people that had an experience that was very good or very bad. I think it's wrong, and I want to investigate it further. I want to see, was this a one-off experience, or is this indicative of a system-level problem? So we start with really one statement as a hypothesis, and then, go ahead.
Oh, and then we gather data to analyze the hypothesis at a system level. So basically validating your experience is what this is all about. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to take, you're trying to take everything out of it except for the facts, and you're trying to basically create a conversation that is based in reality and get everyone on the same page, policymakers, the community, city staff, so we can all move forward. We can create a baseline of consensus.
And to change a system, we have to make sure that the issue we're bringing up happens across the board. Not to say that other situations are okay, but if we want to change a policy, change the way the city does something for everyone, it's important to know what our starting point is. Which brings us to this point, which is we use data because for too often, a lot of the big problems facing our city, someone says, this happened to me, it was wrong, and then nothing happened. So data is one of the tools we can use to turn policymakers' heads. Data provides a basis for comparison, a quantitative analysis, and a starting point for a policy conversation. So for example, you could say we know something is bad, but how bad? And also, how does the issue we're having compare to other cities?
And so an important thing to remember here, and I've put a little code up here, basically means data plus individual stories creates a powerful narrative for change. So data is one side, and I think one thing that we really value is personal experiences that can strengthen the data. So, bringing experiences of community members who are validating what this data says is incredibly important and reinforces why policy change is necessary. And it also is really important when you're measuring outcomes. Is this data that we're seeing as we're generating outcomes, is this actually happening to people in real life? So is it representational of, or is it representative of what's actually happened?
And that's why I think when we're talking about data a lot, and I look at data a lot, but I always have to remember that it's not just about data by itself. The numbers can lead you astray depending on what you're looking at. So that's why I think it's important to use data to kind of expand what you might hear from an individual story, but make sure that what you're finding when you're looking at the data is backed up by people's real experiences. And here's another reason why I think data is really important in 21st century government. Because data is a double-edged sword. And we see government across all departments, and not just in Asheville, across the country, using data more and more to measure their outcomes, to measure their effectiveness. However, if the community isn't involved looking at data as well, we're getting their interpretation of we get government's interpretation of how they're doing, which tends to make government look like they're doing a really great job. So that's why we feel that it's so important for community to get educated on data. We don't all have to be data analysts, but we have to know how to think about data, because we have to balance that out as we move forward. We have to know that the metrics being collected are the ones that actually reflect what our communities prioritize, what our communities value. And if we don't do this, data is going to continue to be done by government, and it'll just be one side of the story.
And just one example specifically is, the way that APD decides where they're going to enforce, focus their enforcement is based on, arrest rates actually. But when they enforce in an area heavily, they create arrests. So that is a kind of a self-perpetuating outcome there. So it's important when you're looking at data to try to cut deep in your analysis and understand what the actual outcomes you're looking for are going to be.
And we think it's important when you're talking about data to use data to encourage as well as criticize. So data, I feel that data tells truth, but it's a version of truth. But we also need to think about not using data just to show that government is doing something wrong or only looking at what they currently collect. What I think is really interesting when we talk about police specifically is they measure arrests, they measure citations, they know calls for service, which are all what I would call, punitive interactions with law enforcement. They don't record what I feel are more of the positive actions, things where they're actually helping people, which concerns me because it means when people are getting evaluated for their job performance, we only look at how much, I don't want to say bad they did, but how many punitive actions they took, but not how many supportive actions they took. So I think it's important as we look at 21st century government to start to think of, is this government department even collecting what's important to me? Are they collecting the kind of actions that I think are positive? And if they're not, then we can have a data conversation that's completely different about maybe you should start collecting this. So one specific example there, Amy Cantrell and Beloved and Homeless Voice started to talk about arrests of homeless individuals in our city. And one of the things we figured out there is the police department said, in a lot of cases, we're transporting people to services that they need, but it wasn't documented. So that's one of the ways that I think over time we could encourage our city to document a set of information that they're not capturing at all today. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to really quickly just highlight one case study, one area of an example of where we use data and actually went from asking the question to getting some policies changed. So we connected with Amy Cantrell of Beloved at a homeless coalition meeting, I don't even remember when, over 2 years ago. And she had a whole list of ideas, but one of them was related to data. And she said, I've been asking the city for arrests of homeless individuals for 3 years and I've never gotten anything back. Yeah, and I just started making public records requests and I said, okay, maybe I can help. Maybe I can get the request in front of the right person so we can get some answers back. And I did, and it still took like 6 months, a lot of back and forth. But we were able to get some data that used addresses to somewhat infer whether arrests might be applying to homeless individuals. So we looked at if people provided a shelter as an address on their citation record, they probably have experienced housing instability at some point. So what we did is we used that data and we took it to city committees and showed that just what the data said. And it showed some interesting things. It showed that arrests occur with people listing those addresses a lot more often than our city council members thought. It showed that trespassing as a charge occurred more often than people thought. It showed that public urination happened more often than people thought. And the data itself didn't fix anything. What the data did is it allowed a conversation to start in a fact-based way. It allowed people had been saying that these arrests had been happening for years, for forever, and I don't, our elected officials should have listened when they were saying it, but the data helped get that conversation started. So what happened after that is the city started publishing a homelessness dashboard showing some of the positive actions that other city departments are taking. We've started this discussion about documenting service delivery. And recently, the new city budget actually makes one of the city's public restrooms 24 hours. And this has caused continuing discussion around doing written consent for searches of people that are either in vehicles or walking around on the streets in Asheville, which are all specific policy actions that are designed to ensure that everyone in Asheville is treated fairly. And I think the data was really a key factor in turning issues that had been discussed for a long time and actually making something that could work through the policy process. So this is our last slide. What we want to do is just let everyone here know that transparency is not something government does by itself. It's something where we all actually do have a really, really important role to play, because a lot of things that are public records are not accessible until someone asks for it. So everyone here today should, just start thinking about more ways we might be able to make government more transparent.
Yep, and you do not have to be an analyst to make an impact. Just simply asking the questions, letting government know that this is important to us, and having these processes work really well is critical to transparency and accountability is a huge win for us. So just be proactive, even if you can't crunch the numbers. Advocating for transparency is incredibly important.
And Code for Asheville can be a great resource. If you have a data question, we have people here who can help you answer it. And also, just in closing, in a city the size of Asheville, what I find really interesting is how a small group of people can make a big difference in terms of transparency. If 5 or 10 people get together and really want to see a data set added and ask the right people enough times, that data set could all of a sudden appear on the city's data portal, and I think that's really cool. It's not that we're not such a giant city that a small group of people can't make a difference. So I encourage everyone to do that. So now we have a few minutes for questions. I did want to ask, everyone has these surveys. If you can, before you leave today, you don't have to do it right now. Just try to fill out these surveys and give them to me or Jesse or Lauren in the back of the room. You don't have to answer anything that you don't want to, but this feedback is really helpful for us to make this presentation better as we do it moving forward.
And just again, my name is Jesse. This is Patrick. Jesse at prcapps.com. You can get us at support.prcapps.com. Any at prcapps.com is pretty good, and we'll all receive it. But
and I'll point out our team. It's me, Jesse, Lauren, and Holden, who was here earlier but had to leave. We're a team of 4 people. So if you can catch any of us, we communicate very well.
So questions, if there are any, we'll be happy to answer them. None. All right. Well, we must have explained that really well.
On the earlier slide, you had a site listed, Simplicity.
Yes.
What is that?
That's simplicity.asheville.nc.gov. That's the city's tool that utilizes some of their open data. So do you want to pull that up?
Yeah, here we go.
Eric, how would you describe Simplicity?
Why don't you go there?
Yeah.
It is a place you could go.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
I just learned that all this, all the guard waste is still sitting on the curb on my street.
Because it's not your pickup day yet. So Simplicity, you can explain
Simplicity is kind of 2 things. One is it's a way of looking up city information by address. So you can find out things like, when is the garbage pickup, what's the zoning where you are. But then you can also look for things like what's all the crime around me, what permits are being done around me. Is it not?
No, it's good. I'm just.
Why don't you just
is there
do
anywhere you
70 Court, do 70 Court Plaza.
70 Court Plaza.
That's City Hall. So one part of it is looking up information by address. And I would love to hear from you what additional information you might want to look for. So you can look by address, you can look at property information, et cetera. If you go there, you can look for crime and development. We'll soon have some, what capital projects are near me, and there's other kinds of information. We'd love to hear what you'd like to see.
And I would say some people use this for these very basic questions. When's recycling? Is it this week or next week? And it shows you answers to things like that.
The second thing that this is, if you go to the dashboards or back to wherever, so you can look at budget. Right now we have 3 dashboards. The annual budget, operating budget, capital projects, and information on homeless programs. That is just getting built out. And again, from a transparency and accountability standpoint, we'd love to hear what kinds of things you'd like to see there. Because we rewrote this whole thing and launched it this year, relaunched it this I mean, we officially got out of beta on this back in like March.
And I wanted to point out, if you're interested in budget data specifically, the Simplicity budget dashboard is really useful, specifically because it has more fine-grained information than you can get elsewhere. So if you just, what I did is I went on budget and I clicked details. And then if you scroll down the page, you get these tables that have pretty fine-grained information. You know.
And you do the same thing in the visualization up there. So we would like, I mean, eventually we want to have all the same open data accessible through the open data portal, through Simplicity, and through just a straight database.
Is this a site you manage, your department manages directly, or do you
Yes.
just feed this to an aggregator who puts it up?
We built this, we do this directly, we developed it, I do the back end. the
It's
person-
interesting, it's actually developed by city staff. It's not something a vendor sold to them. So,
Okay.
so they are able to customize it if they have
And
time.
as of this past week, all the code is open source. And the guy, one of the guys standing up there, we have a public version of the data in a database, and Patrick just stood up the back end, the front end. You can actually make changes to the system and propose them back to the city and say, hey, would be really cool if you added this visualization or something, and we can talk about it.
So, and that it gets a little technical, but it's pretty big what we're going to be able to do. For example, I'm working on making some data available that allows you to look at city data sets, say crime, but aggregated by month and aggregated by category. Because right now their data feed kind of gives you the fire hose of everything. But we're actually developing ways that we can do more statistical analysis without having to do a lot of work up front.
And as soon as he figures out those ways, we're going to steal them and put them in Simplicity.
Yeah.
It's open source, so.
Joke's on you. All right. Well, thank you so much. Are there any other?
Do you have a question?
I have one question. Is the Asheville app at all integrated with this?
The Asheville app is from a separate vendor,
Right.
so it's not integrated with this. I'm not sure what the status is, but the 311 data that comes from the Asheville app either is currently on the open data portal, or we're figuring out how to get it there too, so you can look at the data from it. But as a system, it's not integrated with this.
So
What I was interested in is just citizens request something to be done, how fast are they done, when are they done, that kind of data, I think is interesting.
Yes,
So
and if it's not current, I know there was a dated one on the open data portal. I believe we're working on trying to get that back onto the open data portal.
And I would say, I know I've personally asked that data be added to the open data portal, and I think Scott was looking.
The person to ask about that one is Scott Barnwell, and he and I will swap places upstairs, downstairs for the next session.
And I agree that calls for, that's things like potholes, sidewalk repairs, all kinds of things like that. That's really interesting data that lots of people would like to look into.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
We
we're
really
at time, and
appreciate it.
thank you everyone for listening to
Oh,
us
yeah.
talk.